Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Jummah Mubarak. Welcome to today's Friday Reflections on this Friday, the 21st of May, 2021. I hope everybody is well, wherever you are tuning into this from. We are living in testing times, and there are a number of things going on around the world at the moment, which are very troubling and stressing people out. Are very worrying to witness, traumatic too. So I hope you and your families are well wherever you're tuning into this from, and I pray Allah grants relief from all of these difficulties and calamities of the times in which we live, and makes things easier for all those people affected by them. Last week, I read from this book by Ibn Arabi, the Bezels of Wisdom, translated by R.W.J. Austin. This is copyright 1980. And last week, I read chapter 16, The Wisdom of Compassion in the Word of Solomon. So I thought, following on from that, it would be rather nice to read the next chapter in this book, which is the wisdom of being in the word of David. David, of course, is Dawood, alayhi salam, the prophet within Islam, and also a great king. We recognize that, and also within the Jewish tradition as well, which Christians also accept. So Dawood alayhi salam, or David as he's called in English, was a tremendous person. And this chapter was dedicated by Ibn Arabi to Dawood alayhi salam and the wisdom in his character and in his life that was granted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The introductory note begins, the Prophet David, like all the prophets who feature in this work, was the special and particular human context for some particular aspect of divine wisdom. In his case, it was the personal appointment to the office of vicegerent, which function is, in a general sense, shared potentially by all humankind. Man, for Islam in general and Sufism in particular, is, as has already been mentioned in the introduction, at once the slave and the appointed representative of God. That unique microcosmic creation who reflects in his makeup both the createdness of the cosmos and the creativity of God, being of both, yet being neither of them completely. Man, as Khalifa, vicegerent, must not fail in his divine stewardship to remember that is dhikr, always, in whose name he acts and commands, being always in danger of the sin of self-deification or the association of himself, shirk, with God as a separate entity. As is clear from this chapter, the office of vicegerent is of two kinds. The one concerned with matters spiritual and divine, the other directed to the ordering of the cosmos, the one inner and universal, the other outer and restricted to a particular religious heritage. The first kind relates to that inner wisdom mentioned in the Quran, which impels man to reaffirm his commitment to the uniqueness of the divine identity and to efface his own in the divine oneness of being. The second is related to the revelation of Scripture that urges man to govern and order the many and complex concerns of this world, which is the kind with which David was personally invested, according to the Quran 38, ayah 26. Not indirectly by some human authority, as is generally the case, but directly by God himself. So this characteristic that human beings have had ever since Adam alayhi salam, that we can potentially be representatives of God on the earth, that we are the people who God tasks with fulfilling certain responsibilities while we're on this earth. And at the same time, we are servants of Allah. That responsibility, it's not something to be taken like the Pharaoh did and to think of himself, to puff his chest up and think he's very powerful. No, because whatever power that the Pharaoh had came from God. It was entrusted to him by God. And in his case, he misused it and allowed himself to become proud. Now, we all have something of this characteristic of Khalifa, of vicegerency, of being a representative of God, which basically, if we put it in a more sort of modern and easy to understand way, is responsibility. We each are tasked with degrees of responsibility, and with responsibility comes power. Now, for some people, that could be big responsibility. If you are the president or a prime minister of a nation, you have a lot of responsibility. For other people, their responsibility might be just over themselves, over their flat, over their pet. It might be a much lesser kind of responsibility that has been granted to them. But they are of the same nature of responsibility. Everybody has a degree of responsibility. And depending on the capacity, depending upon what Allah has granted them, that might be more or less. But it is a characteristic of human beings to have this. And it's split into also two different kinds. There is one concerning spiritual matters, and the other concerning like government and ordering of things. So it's more practical and material matters. This continues. The outer vicegerency is granted only to certain prophets and apostles or to their successors, whether by appointment, election, or providence, apart from the general vicegerency implicit in all human power and activity. The inner office is granted, often in a more direct way, to certain saints who are appointed to be the special transmitters of spiritual power and authority. There is no doubt that, for Ibn al-Arabi, the inner vicegerency was the greater office, and in view of his own special sense of spiritual mission, he probably considered that he himself enjoyed this privilege. He is quick to point out, however, that such a person would always outwardly conform to and pay allegiance to the tradition of the prophet or apostle under whose dispensation he was living. So, in other words, whatever was given to Ibn Arabi, it's obviously, it still comes under the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his prophet and the prophet of these times. And it also comes from the humility of the saint to actually acknowledge that. Otherwise, if they lack humility, then they lack everything else, and they wouldn't have it. So they will, even though Allah has granted some of these awliya Allah tremendous things, but they will always give the thanks and appreciation and respect to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, through whom this was granted. This is a matter of adab and respect, something sadly that is lost on a lot of people in our times. David, however, is the only individual appointed by name to this office, and thus he enshrines in his life and person that particular wisdom of governance, which is itself a mode of revelation of the Spirit, i.e. the Spirit of Allah in man. The chapter ends with yet another discussion regarding the tension between the divine wish as expressed in sacred law and the essential will as manifested by what actually happens in the cosmos. So going into the actual chapter itself, the wisdom of being in the word of David. Know that since prophecy and apostleship are a special divine favor, there is no question of any acquisition of merit. I mean particularly the legislative prophecy. Allah's favors to them in this respect are pure gifts, and not in any sense rewards for which any compensation will be asked of them. His bestowal on them being a matter of favor and selection. He says, and we gave to him Isaac and Jacob, meaning to Abraham, the friend of Job, that's Ayub alayhi salam. Allah says, and we bestowed on him his people, and with them their like. Of Moses, he says, and we gave him from our mercy his brother Aaron, a prophet, and other similar examples. They were invested from the beginning, and in all and most of their states, by his name, the bestower. He says of David, we gave to David of ourselves bounty, not linking it with any notion of a return to be demanded of him, nor is there any suggestion that it was granted as a reward or recompense. When God demands thanks, he demands it of the people. Nor does he omit to mention that David, so that the people might thank him for what Allah has bestowed on David. Sometimes when I read these books, because there's a lot of him with capital H and he, I will actually substitute Allah to try and clarify, because otherwise it can get confusing to people listening, I'm sure. So here Ibn Arabi is talking about the prophets Abraham, Moses, also Job. He said that they were given things through Allah's quality of the bestower. But it's slightly different for Dawood alayhi salam, where he says, we gave to David of ourselves bounty. And this wasn't linked to any kind of return or something. And it wasn't linked to any kind of, like, he was being rewarded or recompensed for something. So, and then Ibn Arabi goes on to say that when Allah demands thanks from people, he demands it of the people. And in the Quran, Allah asks the people to thank Allah for bestowing David on them, or for what he bestowed on David. So for what Allah gave to David and granting David to be their king, which, as anybody familiar with Judeo-Christian tradition would know, that this came after a time when the people were demanding to have a king. Before that, they had judges. The people of Israel had judges. And they were granted David as a king because they kept demanding of Allah, we want a king like the other nations. And Allah warned them that it's not necessarily what you you think it is. It's not necessarily the best thing for you. But because they kept asking for it and praying for it, then eventually Allah granted them Dawood alayhi salam as their king. But of course, Dawood alayhi salam was a king granted through Allah. It was granted on divine authority, so he was more than just a normal king. And we know he was a prophet of Allah as well. Ibn Arabi continues, if the prophets gave thanks to God for his favor and gifts to them, it was not something required of them by God, but something that came voluntarily from themselves. As when the apostle stood until his legs become swollen, giving thanks to God for forgiving him his early and later sins, When someone spoke to him on the matter, he said, "Shall I not be a grateful servant?" It's, in Bukhari. God said of Noah, "Indeed, he was a grateful servant," albeit that few of God's servants are so. And how true is that? How many people are really thankful to Allah for all of the things which Allah bestows upon them? Or even just of a generally thankful and appreciative nature? A lot of people, when they receive things, they do not necessarily appreciate, or momentarily they might show some appreciation, but then very quickly forget afterwards. It is something in human nature. The first favor granted by God to David was that he gave him a name, not one of the letters of which is a connecting letter, by which he cut him off from the world and informed us about him by his name alone, the letters being Dal, Alif, and Waw. He named Muhammad, on the other hand, with a name containing letters of connection and disconnection, by which he joined him to himself and separated him from the world. So combining in his name both states, so the state of connection to Allah and separation from the world. These are states of being. And that is actually contained within the name, within the letters that were used in the name. And Ibn Arabi continues and says he did the same for David, but inwardly and not in his name. This is what especially distinguishes Muhammad above David. I mean the information concerning him by his name. In his case, it is complete in every respect, as in the name Ahmed, which is of God's wisdom. Concerning his favor on David, he also mentions the turning back of the mountains and their exaltation. They exalted God because of his exaltation, so that their action might conform with his. Similarly, in the case of birds, God granted him power, i.e. God granted David power and attributed it to him. He also granted him wisdom and the final say in affairs. Finally, the greatest favor and degree by which God singled out David was that he attributed the vicegerency specifically to him, which he did not do for any other human, although there were regents among them. He said, "O David, we have appointed you a vicegerent in the earth, so judge between men with truth and follow not caprice. We have appointed you a vicegerent in the earth, so judge between men with truth and follow not caprice." Meaning anything other than that's Allah's inspiration that comes to your mind in exercising your judgment, lest it cause you to err from the path of God. That is the way revealed to the apostles. Then he admonishes him, Allah admonishes David, saying, "For those who stray from God's path will be a severe punishment, because they have forgotten the day of reckoning." But Allah does not say, if you stray from my path, you will be severely punished. Should it be pointed out that the vicegerency of Adam was also specified? We reply that it was not, that's Ibn Arabi replying, that it was not as specific as David's, since he said only, "I am going to put a vicegerent on the earth," not, "I am going to make Adam a vicegerent in the earth." Even if Allah had said it, it would not be the same as saying, "We have made you a vicegerent," as in the case of David. While the latter statement is unambiguous, the former is not, since no further mention is made of Adam in what follows, to the effect that he is who is the vicegerent specified by God. Therefore, consider carefully what God tells us of his servants. So, although it is said in the Quran that Allah will make Adam, no, sorry, not Adam. Let me read this right. Yeah, Allah only said, I'm going to put a vicegerent in the earth. Allah did not specify that he's going to make Adam his vicegerent. This is what Ibn Arabi is mentioning here. Whereas he's saying with David, Allah said he has made him a vicegerent. So with Adam, he just says to Adam that that Allah is going to put someone on the earth who would represent him and rule on his behalf. But with David, he says he is that person. And then Ibn Arabi warns, therefore, consider carefully what God tells us, or what Allah tells us of his servants. Similarly, in the case of Abraham, the friend, he says, I'm going to make you a leader, imam of men, not a vicegerent. It might be the case if we knew that leadership here also means vicegerency. It cannot be the same, however, because he does not specifically call it vicegerency. A further specification of the vicegerency of David is that it is a vicegerency of judgment, which comes only from God. When he said, so judge between men with truth. Whereas Adam's vicegerency was probably not of this rank. So different degrees of things here. And with Abraham, it's not actually called a vicegerent, it's actually imam, a leader of men, which might also contain within it a similar sort of responsibility, but it's not, Ibn Arabi is saying there is a difference, it's not the same thing. And it's similarly with Adam. Adam's regency might have been based on the fact that he had succeeded whoever was there before, and not because he was God's representative to his creation with the divine power of judgment over them. So this was the other important point with David. David was given authority by Allah to rule people and judge between them. Not just simply to oversee things and try and work things out between people, but actually to judge between them. And this is a very divine quality because Allah is the ultimate judge. Whatever people judge, Allah is the ultimate judge. But Allah gave David permission to exercise justice. So this was a divine ijazah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is quite unique. If indeed he was so be it. But we are here concerned only with what is clearly specified. Okay. God has in the earth representatives appointed by him, and they are the apostles. As for the vicegerency at the present time, it derives from the apostles and not from God directly, since they judge only by what the apostle has laid down for them, and no more than that. There is here, however, a subtle point, which only people like ourselves grasp, that concerns the deriving criteria for judgment directly from what was laid down for the apostle. The one who derives his vicegerency from the apostle arrives at his judgments from the tradition of the apostle or by his own effort, also inspired by that tradition. Among us, however, are those who derive it directly from God, who are vicegerents appointed by God in the same way, and whose criteria come to them in the same way as to that of the apostle himself. Such people appear to follow the apostle only because their judgment in no way contradicts him, as will be the case with Jesus alayhi salam when he will come down and judge, or as is the case of the Prophet in his saying, those are they whom God has guided, so follow their guidance. Such a person is special and worthy in what he realizes concerning the form of derivation, being in the same position as the apostle who confirmed the law of the apostles who preceded him. Thus we follow him in his confirmation of them, not the law revealed to those before him. Thus the derivation of judgment as vicegerent from God is the same as in the case of the apostle. Speaking exoterically, we would say of such a one that he is the vicegerent of God, as speaking exoterically, that he is a vicegerent of the apostle of God. This is something which is a very interesting point, because sometimes you get other people get hold of these things and they will criticize the awliya Allah and say, see, what are they following? Maybe not this particular quote, but other things where people have recognized that a certain wali of Allah, a certain saint of Allah, has been granted things directly by Allah. And other people noticing that, maybe because of jealousy or because of how they've been taught about Islam, will not recognize it. And they will try to make some conflict between that and the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when actually these people themselves saw what they were following as only confirming the sunnah. They were granted something directly, but what they were granted directly confirmed the sunnah and was in line with the sunnah. So as long as you weren't looking at them with a mischievous mind, you would see that what they are doing and what the Prophet Muhammad was doing was the same thing anyway. But they were actually granted direct knowledge as well as being in the ummah of the Prophet Muhammad and therefore following the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad. It's like, as Ibn Arabi says, when Isa alayhi salam returns, he will be having his own authority as a judge, but at the same time his judgments will be in line with those of the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad. So whichever way you look at it, it will appear like he is following in the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, but at the same time Allah has already given Isa alayhi salam his own authority and also divine knowledge and guidance. Ibn Arabi continues, the apostle died without appointing a successor because he knew that someone would later on receive the vicegerency from his Lord and become a vicegerent appointed by the Lord directly, albeit in conformity with the revealed law. Therefore, when he knew that, he did not seek to prejudge the matter. God has vicegerents among his creatures who take from the store of the apostle and the apostles what they have themselves taken. And they know the importance of the preceding apostle because an apostle is always open to new revelation. The vicegerent himself, however, is not open in this way as he would be if he were an apostle. So here you'll see when one prophet came and then another prophet came after them, that they would be respecting what was given to the previous prophets. So for instance, Prophet Muhammad refers back to Jesus, peace be upon him, and Moses, peace be upon him, Solomon alayhi salam, and these are the previous prophets of Allah, and respects what they were given. And actually, if you get back to what we know of these original traditions rather than later things that develop within religions, you can see that it's actually in line. That what was given to Moses and what was given to Jesus and what was given to all of these prophets was actually in line with what was given to Muhammad. They are not in contradiction. although some people try to make it out to be. But although the Prophet Muhammad was teaching in line with also what was previously given, he also had revelation given directly to him. But Ibn Arabi is saying with vicegerents, that is representatives and leaders who are following in the tradition, or what we might say is the sunnah of the prophets, that they only have the sunnah to go on. They don't have the revelation coming to them in the same way, because they're not prophets, otherwise they would be prophets. So there's a difference there. So when the vicegerent legislates, he propounds only such knowledge and judgments as conform to what the apostle was given. Thus outwardly he is a follower, not an equal like the other apostles. Consider how the Jews believed in and confirmed Jesus, so long as they thought that he had brought no more than Moses. As in the case of the vicegerency today in relation to the apostle. When, however, he enlarged on or abrogated a judgment established by Moses, Jesus being an apostle, they could not tolerate that, since he was contradicting their preconceptions about him. The Jews were ignorant of the truth of the matter, and so demanded his execution, the story being told to us by God in his mighty book. Important point to note here, there were some Jews in the time of Jesus who did call for this, but they were not doing it from a position of maliciousness. They were doing it because they had certain preconceptions about who Jesus would be, and that he would be following the law of Moses. They did not expect that he would be another prophet. So they didn't expect that he would bring new laws, new revelation that would enlarge upon what was given to Moses. And when they saw this, in defense of what they had been given and what they were following in the tradition, their sunnah from Musa alayhi salam, some of them asked for Jesus' execution or came against him. And this was simply because they had no knowledge. It was not because they were evil, and it was not because, as sadly some anti-Semitic people have made out over the years, but it was simply because this was not within what they understood. Just like, it is certainly possible when Jesus returns, or when Imam Mahdi begins his work, that they may do some things which Muslims, because of the way they've been taught and trained, might not understand, and will come against them and criticize them and condemn them and want them killed. And yet they will actually be acting upon the true teachings because they are divinely ordained people. So this is always something, be very careful of, and we need to have a degree of humility about. But it could well be that when Jesus returns, or Imam Mahdi starts his work, that there will be Muslims that will come against them and will attack them and criticize them because they do not understand what they are doing. Such was the situation in the time of Jesus when some Jews came against him because they did not understand what he was doing. And so from their eyes and in their perspective, it was blasphemy. So it was actually from a misguided defense of their faith and beliefs. And may Allah forgive them. Even there is a tradition within the Christian scriptures that Jesus himself said, "The Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." So even Hazrat Isa alayhi salam prayed for them. This is interesting as well, in line with what the Prophet Muhammad struggled against his entire life. It was Jahiliyyah. His greatest struggle was with Jahiliyyah. And what is Jahiliyyah? Jahiliyyah is ignorance. the absence of knowledge and understanding and wisdom. It is a curse upon any society. So continuing, Ibn Arabi discussing Isa alayhi salam, Jesus, peace be upon him, said, being an apostle, he was open to new revelation, either limiting an established judgment or adding to it. Limitation being something added without doubt. The vicegerency today is not of this kind, since only rulings arrived at by personal judgment may be limited or added to, not the law promulgated on the lips of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sometimes a region might say something that appears to contradict some tradition on a judgment, and it might be imagined that this stems from personal judgment, while it does not. In such a case, the leader in question is not inwardly sure about the apostolic tradition, otherwise he would judge according to it. If, indeed, it is the sort of tradition that is transmitted by one honest man from another, such a one is not immune from fancy or notional transmission. Such things happen today to a vicegerent, as they will happen also to Jesus alayhi salam. For when he comes again, he will abolish many established rulings based on personal judgments, clarifying thereby the truth revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and not least in the case of community leaders contradicting each other on a single revelation. Subhanallah, what I just said is this is Ibn Arabi. He's pointing this out clearly himself. We know, of course, that were a revelation to be sent on the matter, it would agree with one of the conflicting opinions, and that would be the divine judgment on the matter, all else being corroborative, if confirmed by the reality, i.e. by God, so that this community might be relieved of stress and that God's judgment might be spread throughout it. As for the saying, if allegiance is paid to two caliphs, then kill the second, this applies only to the outer viceregency, which wields the sword. Indeed, even if the two caliphs agree together, one of them must be executed. This is not the case with spiritual viceregency, in which no killing is involved, such action being applicable only to the outer form. So, according to the old traditions and the way things were, if there was two caliphs, they would often come into conflict with one another. And this is because they're competing kings, basically, over states and its authority, and it can create disorder and chaos. But when it comes to spiritual matters, it's different. Ibn Arabi continues, this matter of killing in the outer caliphate, which although it does not enjoy the status of the inner, nevertheless is representative of the apostle of God, if it be just, must be inspired by the imagined possibility of two gods. If there were in them gods apart from God, they would bring about corruption, even if they agreed together. However, we know that if, for the sake of argument, they disagreed, the ruling of one of them would be carried out, so that he would be the god, rather than the other. So, this tradition is obviously, it came about because of competing authority and concern for the fitna and disorder and chaos that could be created in society if you've got two caliphs that were claiming to be divinely ordained, but then coming out with different rulings. And then Ibn Arabi is sort of questioning here, well, who were they following, you know? Because if they were following God, then that situation wouldn't happen. One of them would accept the other. From this, one may deduce that every ruling carried into effect in this world today is the decision of God, since it is only God's decisions that have any effect in reality, even if it seems to go against the outer established ruling called the law. That is because everything that happens in the cosmos is according to the ruling of the divine will, and not necessarily in accordance with the rulings of the established law, even though its very establishment derives from the divine will. Its establishment was brought about in a particular way, the divine will being concerned with the confirmation by actualization, but not with guaranteeing it's being acted on. Oops. So a point here being made, it's a very important point actually. Everything that happens in the world, even if it goes against notions that religious people have based upon the understanding of the Torah, of the Quran, of Sharia, of whatever they understand God's law to be, we will see many things happening in the world that seem to go against them. And Ibn Arabi is discussing this here. But he's saying, whatever happens, even if it seems to be against God's law, is God's will. Because if it wasn't God's will, it wouldn't happen. It's actually a weakness of faith if we think that what is happening is not God's will. Because then we are questioning that, has God the ability to stop things and make things happen? It's like some people say, you know, with all the terrible things happening in the world, how can there be a God? Without realizing that this world is a small part of the total existence, and even a small part of the life of the souls which enter in this world. So even if things look terrible here, everything is happening for a reason and coming to pass for a reason. And Allah has given guidance to his prophets in order to, if they or their successors become caliphs or kings or presidents or whatever, some insights and guidance on how to rule their society and what kind of laws to put in place. Allah has given that guidance to them. But at the same time, what Allah allows to happen might not be necessarily in accordance with that guidance. But Allah is still allowing it to happen for reasons which Allah knows best. Because to believe anything else is to think that Allah does not have power over his creation, which is a lack of faith. It is questioning Allah's ability to exercise divine power and control. But Allah chooses to allow things to happen the way they do for reasons which Allah understands, which mean we may not, because Allah sees everything. We only see a small part of the picture. We only understand a small part of what's going on at any given time, if we understand that. So really, we're not even placed to be able to question what God wills to happen. Ibn Arabi continues, The authority of the divine will is immense. So that Abu Talib al-Maliki, what do they call him that? So that Abu Talib al-Makki called it the throne of essence, since for itself, it determines the effectiveness of the divine decision. Indeed, nothing occurs or fails to occur in existence without the divine will. When the divine command appears to be contradicted by what is called disobedience, it is because it is an indirect, through the medium of the prophets or angels, command, and not the existential command. In the context of the command of the divine will, no one can ever oppose God in anything. He does. That may happen only in the case of the indirect command, so understand. In truth, the will is concerned only to create the act itself and not concerned with the agent. Thus, it would be absurd for it not to come into being. In particular instances, however, it may be seen as disobeying God's command, while in others it is regarded as conforming to his command, eliciting praise or blame, as is the case may be. If then the matter is as we have said, then all creatures come eventually to felicity, of whatever kind it may be. This is explained by the fact that the mercy embraces all things and takes precedence over his wrath. That which precedes going first. So Allah's mercy always overcomes Allah's wrath. And this is a promise that's written on God's throne. So even if it appears that that's not the case, this is because of how we are seeing things. It's because of our own limited perception, our own limited ability to see and understand what's going on. It's not because it's not true. And sometimes instances may happen where at first we see something that is a terrible tragedy, and then out of that tragedy, we see amazing things happen. Because there's a lot more going on, and that's only what we see. That's not what is the full picture even then. Because none of us ever see the full picture. When something conditioned by the latter encounters it, the former takes over, and the mercy touches it, since no other has precedence. This then is the meaning of the saying, his mercy precedes his wrath, conditioning all that comes into contact with it, since it stands at the eventual goal towards which all are traveling. Coming to it is inevitable, so that the attainment of mercy and the separation from wrath is also inevitable. The state governs everything that encounters it according as the thing's state dictates. Whoever understands is witness to what we say, but he who does not is assailed by anxiety. There is no mentioned, so trust and be of our own state with respect to it. What we have experienced of it, we have rehearsed to you, and you have from us what we have given you. As for the softening of iron, it means that hardened hearts are softened by admonishment and warning, as iron is softened by fire. Difficulty refers to hearts harder than stone, stone being split and calcified, and not softened by fire. He softened the iron for him, only so he could work protective armor from it, as a sign from God. In other words, something may be protected against only it by itself, so that one is protected from spears, swords, and knives by armor. So you see, they're both made of metal. the spears and the swords and the knives are made of the same metal as the armor. And the armor protects from the same material, which is actually could be very harmful. Thus, in the dispensation of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it is said, I seek refuge from you in you. I seek refuge from Allah in Allah. I seek refuge from Allah in Allah. Because there's only Allah who can protect us. Ultimately, we are all dependent upon Allah's mercy, Allah's divine protection and blessing. Sometimes things happen which Allah has ordained, which could cause some harm to us. But we can seek refuge from those things by praying as the Prophet Muhammad SAW did, I seek refuge in Allah from Allah. So understand, this then is the mystery of the softening of iron, and He is the Avenger, the Merciful, the Giver of grace. SubhanAllah. I love Ibn Arabi. He's very deep, profound. I don't know if anybody has any questions. What's the time now? The time is getting on a bit. So unless anybody wants to ask any questions, I think I will close it now. But if you enjoy these videos on the Thursdays and the Fridays and various other ones I make from time to time, please don't forget to subscribe, if you haven't already, to my Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, wherever you watch the videos. And Salam alaikum. Good to see you. I was just going to close, actually. We've come to the end. And I said, if anybody has any questions, I was reading from this beautiful book by Ibn Arabi, the Bezels of Wisdom. Anyway, you can catch up on the video, but it's really good to see you, mate. Okay, so if you find these videos useful, please don't forget to subscribe, if you haven't already, to my Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube channels, so you can be kept up to date with all of the latest broadcasts and videos. I wish you all the very best. If you're in the UK, have a very good evening. And wherever you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.